Hello and welcome to Health and Wellness. I'm Dr. Jennifer Ashton. Earlier this year, the controversial healthcare reform bill was signed into law. So what does this landmark legislation mean for women? Here to help us understand this is Marcia Greenberger, the founder and president of the National Women's Law Center in Washington, D.C. Marcia, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
So let's start with a global yes or no, good or bad. I know it's difficult. Was the reform bill good or bad for women's health?
I don't think there's any question that taking it as a whole picture, it was really very good for women. It has so many important provisions for women.
So let's start to pick it apart a little bit, because I'm sure that you know it inside and out. There was a lot talked about with gender-specific pre-existing conditions. Now, you've coined the term being a woman is not a pre-existing condition. In my practice, I often say a little more specifically, being pregnant is not a disease. But talk to us a little bit about what that means, a pre-existing condition related to your gender.
Just to step back for 1 second, if you have a pre-existing condition and you're trying to get insurance, you are in trouble, especially if you're trying to get insurance on your own.
And specifically for women, things like having had a C-section in the past or having been a victim of domestic violence, in many cases was qualified as a pre-existing condition.
Absolutely, and that meant either you couldn't get insurance at all, believe it or not, or that particular condition or anything related to it would be excluded.
My name is Chris Turner. I'm a health insurance agent from Tampa, Florida, and I am a rape survivor. In November of 2002, I was drugged and raped while I was on a business trip. Some months later, I needed to find a new health insurance plan. Every person I spoke with said the same thing. Nope, we won't take her. The treatment for the rape that I endured was a pre-existing condition.
I actually had the good fortune of testifying about the importance of healthcare reform for women, and there was a woman testifying with me who, believe it or not, had had a C-section in the past.
We applied with Golden Rule, and I was denied coverage based on having a cesarean with Luke in 2006. I'm in perfect health, and I was shocked that Golden Rule would decline my application. I called Golden Rule, and they said that if I would get sterilized, they would then be able to offer insurance to me. I discovered that in all but 5 states, it is legal to discriminate against women because of a previous cesarean, either by denying coverage, requiring sterilization, or charging significantly higher premiums than would be paid by a woman without a previous C-section.
So when we're talking about a pre-existing condition, that could have devastating effects on the ability to get health care insurance.
How does that impact on cost differential? Because obviously for the insurance companies to have that in place, they must have done a fairly extensive cost analysis and found that it was more costly for them to insure a woman versus a man. Why is that, number one, and what's being done about that to kind of level the playing field?
Basically, the healthcare reform says insurance companies cannot charge women more than men. And what we did in the National Women's Law Center did a study which showed that insurance companies would charge a woman who didn't smoke more than a man who did. Excluding maternity coverage. Right. So this wasn't based just on women being more expensive to insure. This was just wildly.
This wasn't apples to apples. This was
wildly out of kilter, where there was no law that said women's rates need to be protected, and the insurance company rates just went wild.
And the National Women's Law Center actually showed, obviously you're aware, in 2009, only 13% of health plans you found that were available to a 30-year-old woman in the U.S. provided maternity coverage.
Exactly.
13%.
If you have to go buy it on your own, you were left with 13% of companies even offering it, and then, of course, it was often so expensive it wasn't feasible for women to pay that for that rider.
Incredible.
And it was very inadequate coverage usually under the rider, even if you came up with the money for it.
Now, there was recently a report, Reuters talked about an alleged discrimination against women at a big insurance company, WellPoint, about women with breast cancer and dropping them from coverage. Something that I deal with on a regular basis in my practice, because women oftentimes will consider going for the genetic test, the BRCA genetic test, and they are afraid that if it comes up positive that they will be dropped from their insurance company. What's going on with that?
Now, under healthcare reform, first of all, if you have a pre-existing condition, it doesn't matter for anybody,
Sure.
including this. So there's protection on that ground. Secondly, believe it or not, we have never, up until this law, had any protection, national protection against sex discrimination in healthcare or insurance.
When do you think that we will actually start to see these changes become commonplace? When will they be implemented?
Well, that is important because some of them get implemented right away, some get phased in as the system gets phased in. Obviously, you cannot turn around on a dime. Right away, for example, something really important to families and to women, their dependent children will be covered under parents' policies up to the age of 26. The sex discrimination prohibitions are in effect right away, even though the government has to write the regulations and
Sure.
explain how it all will work. But that is effective right away for women.
So important, and as we were talking about, it's well known that women make the majority of the healthcare decisions, not just for themselves, but for their families. So a lot of people at stake here.
Absolutely
Such an
true.
important topic, and so much more to come. Marcia, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This was very interesting, and we're going to hear a lot more about your great organization, I'm sure, in days to come.
Well, thank you for covering this really important issue. We're so glad to get a chance to talk about the improvement.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of Health and Wellness. I'm Dr. Jennifer Ashton. Until next time, wishing you good health.